Hi, everybody. Welcome back to a new year. I hope you're feeling well rested, refreshed, and ready for another fabulous year in podcasting. I'll be your host today. My name is Elissa, by the way, and I'm the marketing manager over here at Headliner. And today I'm joined by Norma Jean from Podbean. And today we'll be talking about all things growth and monetization. This episode is being released as a bonus episode and kind of a reboot of the Headliner Discovery and Marketing podcast. But don't worry, the Headliner Pod is definitely still alive and kicking and will be back in action every Thursday this year. But enough about that. Before we get started, Norma, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Norma Jean. I am the head of events at Podbean, and we are a podcast hosting and monetization company. So we're the company that you use to publish your podcasts and to monetize it. So we've got a lot of ad solutions built in, along with a lot of other really cool, fun aspects of the platform.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us. I don't know a ton about monetization and podcasting, so I'm personally very excited for this. Yeah, we've got a lot to cover today, so let's go ahead and get to it. So Norma, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Perfect. Okay. So my first question relates to growth and more specifically to first-time podcasters or people to look to get into podcasting. So how can podcasters choose a niche topic that meets their listenership goals and has the potential for audience and engagement growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So we get this a lot at Podbean from our podcasters in terms of like, how do you know when you've niched down enough, right? How do you know if a topic is too broad or if it's too specific? And that's really going to be different for every podcaster. So, the first thing I would say is think about your overall topic, right? Let's say, do you have an example that we can go with, or should I use mine?
Use yours, because mine will be obscure.
No, I like obscurity. Go for it.
Horses. I'm a horse girl.
Great.
So.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's say you want to have a podcast about horses. You're a horse girl. You're all about it. You're all about the equestrian life. So if you wanted to have a podcast about horses, maybe horses is a bit too broad, right? And so maybe you also want to talk about riding your horse, or you want to talk about taking care of your horse, maybe owning a horse, or if you ride very often, maybe I think horse people correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think sometimes you can share a horse with other people, right? So maybe you want to talk about that aspect of it. Maybe you want to talk about all the gear you have. So in terms of horses, maybe I would say that's a pretty broad topic, right? So maybe you want to niche it down to horse riding, right? So maybe riding horses. And then maybe something that would be a little bit niche would be all of your tack, right? Like if you want to have a podcast, maybe just all about the equipment, that might be something that's a little bit too niche, right? Because horse equipment is different for every sport for every equestrian sport, pretty much. So I would think. So let's say, you would niche it down to riding horses, maybe even specifically the sport that you are competing in or that you engage in, whether it's, trail riding or cross country eventing or something like that.
Awesome. Well, I feel like you actually know a lot about horses. Just nobody ever calls out cross country. So I would be interested. I would listen to that podcast.
Yeah. So the idea is that you want to take kind of your overall general topic and you just want to make sure that, it's not so broad that everybody, whoever has ridden a horse, will kind of find it, but then not really engage or be interested. And then it's not so specific that you alienate people that, are interested in your overall topic or, how you engage specifically, in this case, with horses.
Awesome. Well, okay. So once you've found your topic and you've honed down on your niche, in terms of audience building, what kind of initial steps can podcasters take to promote their podcast in new episodes or even just attract those new ears?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of things before you launch your podcast that you want to consider. And there's a lot of things right when you launch your podcast that you just want to have lined up and really kind of ready in terms of processes that you're going to have organized. So before you launch, it's important to have a bit of a plan. And at Podbean, we've got a lot of resources. We have something called Podbean Academy, which is like free courses. And we host virtual events every month on how to launch your podcast, growth marketing, that kind of thing. And it's something where, let's say before you launch, you're going to want to think, okay, every week, what do I have the bandwidth for? Do I have the bandwidth to send out an email to everybody who registers for my newsletter? Do I have the bandwidth to post on every social platform that I think my listeners might be on, or maybe the top 2 or the top 1 platform? Do I have the bandwidth even to produce a show every week and to think about that frequency? So that's really important, number one, because People, psychologically, there's these subconscious patterns that people, rely on. So if you say, hey, my show's going to be weekly, but a month in, you start to say, oh, I didn't get to it this week, right? Or, oh, hey, maybe it's been a couple of months, or, oh, I moved on to something else. It's not really going to promote your show in terms of that consistency. So consistency, I would say, is one of the top tips. And there's a lot of things you can do in terms of that consistency, right? But pick the things you can do. That's number one, right? And maybe your podcast is going to come out every week. Maybe it's going to come out multiple times a week. If you're super ambitious, maybe it's going to come out every 2 weeks. Maybe it's going to come out every month, but it's important to have that consistency. That's number one. I'd also recommend having a trailer, and a trailer is really important because it gives people a little bit of a chance to check out your show without the commitment of really following or listening to a full episode. And you can launch your trailer before you publish your first episode. So what a lot of shows do is that you'll create a beautiful trailer. You'll publish it as your first episode. And at Podbean, you can label it as a trailer. So in a lot of directories, such as Apple Podcasts, that kind of thing, it'll be marked as a trailer. And that's a really cool feature. So before your first episode comes out, you can already start promoting. So you can already create that runway, which is really important. In terms of growth and audience development, once you've launched, it's important to engage with your listeners, right? So the first thing I would say is, and this is kind of a really simple one. And I'm sure you guys talk about this at Headliner, but don't just post on social media and kind of leave it there. Engage with your audience, right? If somebody leaves a comment back, say thanks, right? Like for like, jump in there and work on connecting with people in your community. I think that that's a really important thing. On the horse example, right? Find other people who like horses and engage with them. There's also Facebook groups for a lot of the topics and interests that people have and start podcasts on. And so you can join those groups. You can engage with people online about your topic. Additionally, I think the network that you create with your podcast is really important. And that can also be in the form of guests that you have on your show. So maybe, there's a guest or there's somebody in the space who is on a similar journey with horseback riding. We're running with this example. We're running with it.
I'm here for
running
it.
with it. I'm a horse girl now at this point. Maybe you want to find other people who are experts or who are on the same journey as you, and you want to have them on the show. And so they'll promote it to their networks. And so more people within the niche and interest of your podcast are going to be able to find it, like the content, and engage with it. So that's another really important aspect. And like I mentioned before, that consistency is really key. Just know that you can grow your show and you can build these things out as you go. But if you promise too much in the beginning, it can be a little bit difficult to get that audience trust back.
That's awesome. I mean, yes, we're always screaming to the mountaintops, please engage in your audience. Putting stuff on social media, of course, is a great way to get discovered and get listenership. But if you aren't engaging, then it's so hard to retain that audience and that following and get in people's algorithms. So love that you said that. But kind of in that same vein, thinking about our next question, how important is social media and podcast promotion realm? And because it's a new year, are you kind of predicting any platforms that are going to be like the it platform or trends in podcasting?
Yeah, well, I mean, once again, it depends on your topic, right? If you have a business podcast, LinkedIn is where you want to be. There's a lot of other great examples of podcasts that have just taken off and gotten exponential growth on TikTok. That's a really big one. But it's also important to understand your commitment and where the audience is. We have a lot of podcasters at Podbean who've gotten incredible amounts of exposure and growth through TikTok, but also, that really ventures into content creation. How much time are you going to spend with a green screen, making your TikTok, almost making a trailer for each episode, which is great if you have the time and the bandwidth. Don't get me wrong. But if you don't, it's something that is important to think about in terms of consistency. In terms of the importance of social media, it's where a lot of people are going to find your show. It's where a lot of people are going to be able to engage with you, engage your guests. It's also a little bit of a way to promote and thank your guests for coming on, right? To tag them and to repost them and to say, hey, this person's on the show and they have such great experience. They've won so many medals, horseback riding, whatever it is. But it's something where, in terms of social media, a lot of the time, people who listen to podcasts, you don't listen to a podcast on social media necessarily, right? So if you're on Instagram and somebody sees a podcast they like, there's going to be a few more clicks in between that social media and the app where somebody is going to listen to the podcast, which in the industry is called a directory, right? So it's the app or the platform where you would actually listen. That being said, I mean, I think in terms of your podcast, it's not just audio, right? It's the brand that you're creating. It's the guests that you have on. And especially, when you go down the line in terms of bringing in sponsorship or monetization, a lot of those marketing channels can really add value for your sponsors as well, right? So if you're new to monetizing your podcast, it's something where, maybe we're going to go with the horse example again. Here we go. Maybe there's like an event or an upcoming show for horses or a horse brand product that, maybe a good fit for your show, and you have a decent listenership in that audience. You can reach out to them and you can say, hey, this is the show and these are some of the big guests that I've had on. And maybe this is some of the downloads we get if you've established that you have consistent downloads and you're growing the show. But we also have, our overall reach, which is this is how many people sign up for the newsletter. And this is how many people we reach on Instagram. And this is how many TikTok followers we have. And so for anybody who is sponsoring your show, they're also going to be able to benefit from that reach as well. So social not only plays into the success of people finding your show, but continuing to listen and get excited about new episodes, promoting your guests, and supporting your sponsors.
Awesome. Well, that's just such great information and tips. And I couldn't agree more. Podcast promotion, especially when you're looking at growing, it's so individualistic and it's unique to each show. So it's really important to dig into your analytics. And like we were talking about, looking at that qualitative feedback for some signals, figuring out type of content that people are liking, that's resonating, and ultimately something that you can execute on consistently to grow your followership. Okay, so now let's kind of get into the second part of the podcast, which is looking at podcast monetization.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about some of the top monetization strategies available to podcasters and how they can determine the most suitable approach to monetization, given things like personal bandwidth and audience size?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing you can do if you're even before you even launch your show, right? Before you've even launched even the trailer, you can say, hey, this is what my show's about. You've started recording. Maybe you've gotten some bigger guests booked. You can go to businesses that that are within your niche and say, hey, I just want you to know I'm going to launch this podcast. And this is the energy and the input that I've put into it. And these are the guests that I have on that are already confirmed or recorded. And, this is what I'm doing. And then you can put together a marketing package and a one sheet for potential sponsors. So any podcast of any size can do that. And that's really where you're going to go individually to the businesses that can support your podcast and that are a good fit. And you're going to build that relationship one-to-one. And so any podcaster at any point can do that. And I think that that's really important, especially for specific niche podcasts. For example, we have a podcast with us called DNA Today, and it's all about genetics, right? So their sponsors are not going to be horse brands, right? Like we're talking about a horse podcast or a podcast on horses or an equestrian podcast, one of those. But it's something where, approaching the businesses within your niche that are going to gain value, right? Who are going to be able to and want to align themselves and their products and their services with some of the guests and experts that you have on your show is really important. So that's number one. And that would just kind of be a direct approach. And you can say, hey, I'm going to run this ad on my podcast. It'll be a 30-second or 1-minute ad. From there, there's a couple of ways that you can put that ad on the podcast. And so let's talk about that next. So once you've got the ad, and usually the host will record it themselves, and that's called a host read ad. And if you're listening to a podcast and the host offers a personal endorsement, statistically, it does better because the audience trusts the host, right? Your audience of your podcast trusts you. They trust you to create good content. They trust your taste. And so you can say, hey, this is a product that I've tried. Make sure you try the product. That I like. Make sure you like the product. And that I think maybe, you'll like it too. Give it a try. Here's a discount code, that kind of thing. And so that would be called a host read ad because the host reads it. Now you can insert that ad to your podcast in several ways. The original way and the oldest way that people have been doing it is called baked in. And that's where it's part of the original audio of your podcast episode. And so baked in ads are pretty popular, but once an ad's in your episode, you can't change it. So there's a lot of solutions now with technology that are incredible. At Podbean, we have dynamic ad insertion built in. DAI is the acronym that we use for it. And at Podbean, it's called Pod Ads, and it's a really phenomenal technology. And so what you would do is you can select the timestamp in your podcast where you would like to insert the ad, and then you can change the ads up. So if you're a podcaster, what we love about podcasting is that a lot of shows have been around for years and years, and you develop a rapport with the host. The host develops a rapport with your audience. And one of the things that's great about that is that you can serve fresh ads on your entire back catalog. So maybe you have an episode from 5 years ago that's really great, right? And it's one of your most popular episodes. And even now, it still gets significant downloads. You can continue to monetize that episode with fresh ads. You can continue to sell those ad slots continually. So you can keep selling them and keep generating revenue from the content that's evergreen. So that's a really cool thing. And Podbean, you literally upload the ad, you insert it into the episode. You can select all your episodes. You can select whichever episodes you want. It's a really cool technology. So that's called Pod Ads. At Podbean, we also have an ads marketplace, and that's kind of an online marketplace forum where you can list your podcast, and people who want to buy ads on podcasts can find your podcast and buy ad campaigns. As a podcaster, you can, approve them and make sure they're a good fit for you. And then literally people will find your podcast and book ads through your show, which is a really cool feature as well. And our ads marketplace, it's free. You can sign up. It's phenomenal. So that's also built in. And then the third kind of digital ad is called programmatic. And programmatic is a really interesting ad format. We also have it at Podbean, so you can opt in. And it's where ads are served in near real time. And so it's done with servers. And you have a demand side platform and a supply side platform, and it's all very technical. But basically what happens is that as someone's listening, the ad will get served into the show. And so that's also really cool because as a podcaster, you don't have to do anything. You just sign up and then the ad will automatically be inserted into your show. And you can select at Podbean, if you don't want any political ads or anything like that, sensitive topics, we have options to opt in or out of those kind of things. It's a really cool thing because then you don't have to think about it. You don't have to manage it, and you can just get a check, which is, I think, really what most people want when they think about monetizing.
That's so awesome. So kind of more impromptu, there are a lot of ways that you can kind of almost like filter the type of content that's being featured on your show if you are trying to monetize it. Some things that we talk to podcasters is people are always concerned about their brand, of course, and put it the best foot forward. So are there like a lot of ways that you can control the type of content that's being monetized on your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the ads marketplace, you get approval. So anybody that wants to buy an ad on your show, you get to approve it. With the first example that I gave in terms of that DAI, dynamic ad insertion, you would be, uploading the ad yourself. So you'd have approval. And with programmatic, that's where the Podbean team and our advertising team goes out and works with really big brands. So you can select what kind of ads you're comfortable with. And that's really important as well. And then based on the demographics of your listener, they'll just be inserted automatically. So you won't necessarily get to approve the company specifically because it's served in almost, near real time, down to the microsecond.
I mean, that's really cool technology. So my last question I have to ask, we're starting a new year. A lot of people are thinking about kind of either starting something new or even just like rebooting something. So do you have any pieces of advice for podcasters who are looking to start their monetization journey in 2024?
Yes, so much advice. And obviously, if you have any questions, you can always email us at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. I also just want to throw that out there because we do field questions and also help them. But in terms of monetization journey and starting it, I think it's important, number one, to look at what you're working with. What's your podcast about? What's the audience size you have? What's the social reach you have? What's the newsletter reach you have? What kind of guests are you booking? And then from there, if you're looking to directly work with sponsors on a one-on-one basis, putting together that kit, putting together a media kit, putting together a one sheet. And we've got a guide on our website at Podbean of just how to do that and, what you want to make sure you highlight, that kind of thing. For the other stuff, in terms of the ads marketplace and programmatic, at Podbean, it's built in. So you just want to make sure that, you go into the back end of your hosting and that you opt in on these things, because it's something where, with Podbean, we've been around for a long time, over 15 years. And so it's something where, as the industry has evolved, a lot of the services and products that we offer have evolved. So just make sure that you're kind of up to date on your host. So for programmatic, that's literally an opt-in, right? And the back end of our ad team will approve stuff and, make sure that your podcast meets certain standards with brands to make sure that we can insert the ads, that kind of thing. But really, you just have to opt in and say yes and say you're ready to monetize. And, a lot of that is based on downloads. So audience growth is very closely tied to a lot of ad insertion and programmatic because it's based on the number of impressions. And so it also ties in with that audience growth of how can you engage with your audience more? How can you continue to grow your audience? And I think also, we mentioned audience engagement and a few other things, but I think also, having a call to action is really important as well. If you give people something specific to do, they're more likely to do it. And so you can say, hey, will you share the show with 3 friends? Hey, will you join our newsletter? Hey, will you write us a review on Apple Podcasts? Whatever it is, be specific and don't ask too many things at once. I think that's a really important aspect as well. But in terms of getting everything sorted for your monetization journey, sign up, check out what we've got at Podbean on the back end, because there's a lot of stuff, when you're in the hustle of like, okay, I've got this new episode and I've got to get it scheduled to go out and I've got to write the show notes and I've got to make sure my transcript's uploaded. Take a couple of minutes, maybe give yourself an hour to go through the platform and just make sure you're up to date on all the features we have at Podbean, because there's a lot in the platform that is something you may not necessarily hone in on when you're in that rush of uploading and publishing an episode.
Well, great advice there, especially for people that are just new to podcasting or looking to get started with monetization. I think that about does it for us. Norma, thank you so much for joining us today. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope our listeners did as well. So like I said at the start of the episode, Headliner will be releasing this as a bonus episode with the Headliner Discovery and Marketing podcast. If you'd like to hear more of this content, or any other types of topic requests, let us know. We like to say we're all ears over here at Headliner. I think that about does it. Catch you next time. And thanks again for joining, Norma Jean.